Despite its 88 years, the Tour de France still creates historic moments. Olaf Ludwig became the first and possibly the last East German rider to win a stage when he headed the field home in Besançon. Ludwig, a first-year professional, fully integrated in the Dutch Panasonic team. His win delights his teammate Eric van Lancker of Belgium behind him. Hello again and welcome to the Tour de France. We're in Besançon this morning. The Tour goes now into its final 2 weeks. But looking back to that win yesterday by Olaf Ludwig, everybody is saying that they think he is now the fastest sprinter in the world in these past 7 months. There was one big loser yesterday though, wasn't there? Michel Vermote of Belgium. On the RMO team, he broke away after 22 kilometres. He was caught 30 kilometres from the end. Why do riders go out on these long, lone attempts to win a stage? Paul Sherwin explains why they do it.
When Michel Vermote from the French RMO squad crossed himself before the start, he probably knew in his mind that he was going to attempt what is known in the business as a suicide break. More than likely inspired to boost the morale of the team, which took a serious knock after his team leader Charlie Motte had failed miserably in the time trial on Saturday. The tactic itself is simple. Vermote had to escape the main bunch alone and build up as large a lead as possible. His lead has to be big enough to hold off the bunch when they eventually start to speed up as the race nears the end. Leads exceeding 10 minutes may seem enormous, but a lone rider moves at an average of 40 kilometres an hour, whilst a chasing bunch cruises along at 50 kilometres an hour. So a rider with a 10-kilometre lead can lose all of this within just 1 hour. Yesterday, Vermote did just this. He built up a lead of 11.5 minutes, but when the bunch chased, his lead came down rapidly. Vermote had used so much energy that he couldn't even remain in the main bunch and finished last over 11 minutes behind.
And one man who won't be attacking from the start this morning, I'm quite sure, will be Steve Bauer. I'm equally sure he'll remember being here 2 years ago in the Tour de France because he was wearing the yellow jersey then as well. He went on to finish 4th in the race. This year he's already said many times that he wants to better that position, but he's not saying he will actually win the race overall. It's a crucial week for Steve Bauer in the Tour de France because we now go into the Alps in the next couple of days. We go partway up Mont Blanc, we climb Alpe d'Huez, and near the end of the week we have a long time trial in the Vercors that takes us to Villard-de-Lans. By next weekend we should know all of the real names of the challengers in this Tour de France, and whether Bauer is in yellow by the end of the week certainly remains to be seen. Let's have a look at the overall situation. Steve Bauer still holds on to that 17 seconds advantage over Ronan Pensek. By the way, Claudio Chiappucci here has said that he thinks he can win this Tour de France this morning, and he can climb well, so there's another name now to conjure with. Raul Alcala, everybody sees as the outstanding favourite, although he's still over 7 minutes behind Steve Bauer. The route today takes us into Switzerland for our one-day incursion into that country. And for those of you that know the route, we go over the Côte des Rousses, it's a second category climb, and then over the Col de la Faucille. That's the last mountain in France before we all go downhill to the shores of Lac Léman and the finish in Geneva. It's a ride of 196 kilometres. And the field face, another long day in the saddle, expecting to be quite a warm one today. Steve Bauer in the yellow jersey now held the lead for more than a week. There are some say he can hold the lead at least all of the way to the Pyrenees. And Olaf Ludwig in the green jersey. So now on the Côte des Rousses, 2 riders breaking clear here, Eduardo Chozas and Massimo Ghirotto. And this has been a very active morning, and far from a promenade of riders just rolling up towards this climb. They've been attacking all day. These are the latest attackers, and they've got a lead of half a minute as we start the climb up towards the top of the Côte des Rousses. This is the first second category climb of the race. The field behind being led, names being mentioned by the race radio, Robert Miller, and also Chiappucci, Stephen Rooks, and Raul Alcala. And the result over the top of the climb, it's Eduardo Chozas who goes over the top first. Ghirotto is second. A 20-second gap back to Chiapucci, so he challenges again for the King of the Mountains now. Clavarola is fourth, Rooks is fifth. 32 seconds the main field, including Bauer and Raul Alcala. And so we can now move across to the Col de la Fosile. The riders now heading down towards Lac Le Mans below. These are the two leaders. They're still away, Chozas and Ghirotto. They're being chased by a group of 7 riders. And in this group we have Alonso, Jean-Claude Bagot, Vargas, Urea, Brian Holm, the Danish champion, Pascal Simon of the Castorama Rally team, and Tony Rominger, the Swiss rider who wants to win, of course, down in Geneva. It's a group that does not contain any of the immediate threats to Steve Bauer, so they might have a chance.
They could well have a very good chance. There's still a long way to go from the bottom of this climb. As you can see, it's a very dangerous descent. Chasing on his own, one rider, Philippe Louvio, but there's 1 minute gap now from this group back to the main peloton, so they've got a good chance.
Well, Chiapucci, the rider I mentioned this morning, saying he believes he could now win the Tour, suddenly stopped racing on the small mountains for the points to defend his early lead in that King of the Mountains, which at the moment has crossed over to Konosheyev, the Soviet rider. And once the sun came out, he's excelled because he came over the Côte des Rouges in third place. And he said this morning also that he was a man for the sun. He hated the wet weather. And so it looks like he's again finding his form. By the way, Konosheyev has had a great start to the day. He didn't score on the Côte des Rouges, but he did win 2 and finish second on another one of the smaller climbs before they came to the bigger Côte des Rouges. Just look at these descents here. This is where the riders and our own cameramen have to risk their lives to keep up with one another, because they're coming down the Col de la Fosile at about 60 or 70 kilometers now. There's the latest gap here on the 7 riders, 40 seconds. We go back to 1 minute 40 seconds to Philippe Louvio, the champion of France, who apparently has now fled the main peloton, which are at 1 minute 50 seconds. This is looking now to be a very good move, and a number of riders gaining time over Steve Bauer. It is extremely warm on the Swiss side. The riders now more or less in no man's land. They've come through the customs post on top of the Col de la Fosile. They're still in France, and when they come off the bottom, they'll go to the village of Gex, and then they'll run through the French-Swiss border into Switzerland by Geneva Airport, which one half of the runway is in France, and the other half of the runway is in Switzerland.
These two riders here descending very well together, taking it in turn to lead at the front, to go into the corners. Look at the line they take around the corners. They know that they can use all of the road here safely, because the roads on these cols are completely closed down to traffic. They know they're not going to meet anything coming up the other way. At the moment, Chozas is leading into the corners. Ghirotto will come past him in a little while and give him a little bit of a turn at the front and help his share, do his share of the pacemaking.
Well, Chozas, the opportunist, the other day he tried to escape. He got caught, but he's won a stage of the Tour of Italy this year. He's a man who loves to be free of the field. He can't sprint, and he certainly would never live alongside Olaf Ludwig if it came to the straight sprint for the line. And this is the group of 7 riders. One teammate up here of Pedro Delgado, and that is Rondon. And that was a glimpse, I think, of Philippe Louvio. That's Alonso, the teammate of Delgado. There's a lovely shot of the peloton, making their own space as they come down, making sure they can each see the line on those bends. There are many, many riders in the Tour de France who love descending. Paul Schoen was once rated as one of the best in the world going down, and there are those who really dread the descents on the Paul.
A lot of the lighter riders, a lot of the climbers, the Colombians, they detest this kind of descent. This descent today is the kind of descent I really would have loved. It's very technical. You've got to be very careful the lines you take into the corners, because you can see here, sometimes you think you're going into an easy corner, like this corner here. It's just backed away again, and it's very difficult to know what the corner's going to be like. You see there how Ghirotto has lost a few lengths on Chozas as they went round this corner. He'll close up again on the little straight part here, but it is so difficult sometimes to judge these corners because you haven't seen the descent before, and you wonder what it's going to be like.
So as we watch the 2 leaders in the Tour de France descending down towards the Swiss borders, 7 riders chase. The peloton certainly not out of it yet. We'll take a break.
Tour de France isn't so much a sporting event as a small country with mobile borders. It has its own laws and a travelling police force to enforce them. It also has very strict population controls, and for 3 weeks in July, one of these carries more weight in France than a passport. No one gets into the Tour de France without an ID card except the riders, and it's easy to see why. Inside is a world where the food is free and wine is served at 8:30 in the morning. All there is outside are people trying to get in. The Tour has its own weather station, post office, telephone exchange, and the only bank in France which is open on Bastille Day. But what's really impressive is that every evening it's dismantled, moved and rebuilt dozens if not hundreds of kilometres away. Back in Epinal on Sunday morning, the race hadn't even started. At 160 kilometres south in Besançon, the Tour's construction workers were already putting out the hay bales and the crowd barriers. Following them were the race gendarmes, a sort of forced tour, who travel ahead of the riders to close roads, redirect traffic and stop people parking in their own streets. And up to 12 hours ahead of everyone was the army of workers who daily turn sites like this into this. Connecting up TV trucks, rebuilding all the stands and making sure the sponsor's welcome mat doesn't unseat the winner. It's a huge undertaking which often means working through the night, but this being France, never through lunch. Come race time though, the last pieces are in place, and when the whole spectacle's finished, it's better than television. It's now 6:30 in Besançon, a couple of hours after the race ended, and already a lot of these wagons are on the road and heading for Switzerland. By the time you see this piece, the whole Tour de France roadshow will have been reconstituted in Geneva, and it'll be waiting for the leaders to arrive. Back to Phil.
And the travelling circus, the Tour de France, has indeed been reconstructed in Switzerland today and awaits the leaders now as they make their way on Swiss roads towards the finish down on the edge of Lac Le Mans. The two leaders are still clear, but there's been an awful lot of activity behind them now. Out in front we still have Ghirotto and Chozas, but chasing them now on his own is Phil Anderson, and then a group of riders which Anderson joined, and then behind them the main field. But he is riding well this year. The only advantage, Paul, is we're not on main highways in Geneva. We're racing around these roads where the leaders won't be seen till you're almost on them.
Well, that's definitely true, and if they slow down a little bit, the two leaders in the front, it could well be that Christophe Leven will come back from behind, because he was with that group of three riders previously. He could see that they weren't going fast enough for him, so he's jumped away, and I think now he's coming into something like 30 seconds behind, so he could get on just with we get 3 or 4 kilometers to go, and with the energy that he's not used in the rest of the day, he could come up with a sprint.
And the sweat's in your eyes as they look for a rider behind. They may not see him. He can sneak up on them. We're right on the lake and we're closing in. We've got about 2 kilometers to go now as Christophe Leven is riding for his life here. This would be a great win. And my goodness me, the French need a win right now. They haven't won since Thierry Marie started with the prologue time trial victory, with the Castorama Rally getting off to a great start there. And they haven't won anything since. And this would really give the team some morale. There's the famous fountain here, right on the corner of Lac Le Mans in Geneva.
Well, 3 kilometers to go now, and these two riders still haven't looked back. They're working very well together. They probably don't even worry about any riders coming up from behind. And Christophe Leven is just seeing the fountain there himself. He can see the riders. It's like a carrot just in front of a donkey.
And Ghirotto wants more action out of Chozas. Chozas looks over his shoulder. He doesn't believe. He looks again. Now, these two riders have a decision to make, because neither will want to lead, because they know the man in second place has the advantage of coming out of the slipstream, but they've got to keep the pace up, otherwise Leven will have them.
Well, that's when it becomes a game of poker. It's the man who's got the coolest nerves to be able to take the risk and not lead out. It's a risk you take of knowing that you can beat both riders in the sprint, the one who's coming from behind and the rider you're with. I'm not sure what the situation will be at the moment for these two, Ghirotto and Chozas, but I think Chozas is probably the one who will probably stay at the back and try and force Ghirotto into leading him out. But all this is an advantage for Christophe Leven. As they go under the 2 kilometers to go banner, he's really got to try and pull this last 15 seconds, and he'll be giving everything he's got.
This is the group behind. Philippe Louvio, champion of France, comes into Switzerland there. Champion of Denmark behind him. Brian Holm, then Yogi Muller, the ex-champion of Switzerland, who wants to be on show today. And the field breaking up also behind them now. They're 25 seconds down, this group. Brian Holm has been at the thick of the front of this action ever since the Côte des Rousses. He was the best placed overall, 17th this morning of all of the attackers on the stage today. None of them, of course, going to endanger Steve Bauer's lead. And Bauer is well aware of that. He's tried to keep out of the limelight today to fight tomorrow over the big climbs, the Col de la Colombière, and of course up Mont Blanc, which we can see from Geneva today, and it's covered in snow. 1 kilometre to go for the two leaders. Leven is still closing in. We have no time check on him. In fact, Paul is telling me 12 seconds here is now the latest from the cars. 12 seconds is the gap, and that might be just, there he is, right under the kite behind them. There's nothing in it, is there? Christophe Leven may have mistimed his effort by a matter of a couple of 100 meters here, and Chozas has now maneuvered Ghirotto into the lead. And you see, he doesn't want to go now, Paul. He eases back on the pedals. Here comes the peloton themselves.
Well, it looks as if the peloton are going to sweep up that group of three riders that was just in front. And Chozas, as I said, has been the coolest man. He's forced Ghirotto to stay in the front. It's a very risky situation because we've got Christophe Leven coming up. He'll be less than 10 seconds behind. If Ghirotto slows down a little bit, Leven will come on, and there is Leven just coming around the corner now. I don't think he's going to catch these two, so it's between these two, Massimo Ghirotto and Chozas, to take the stage victory in the Tour de France. 350 metres to go.
And they're holding the sprint late. Ghirotto doesn't want to start it, but Chozas will go very shortly now. That's why Ghirotto's holding tight left. He knows he's going to force Chozas on his right shoulder. There's no other side he can come. And Ghirotto starts the sprint himself. As he comes up 50 metres to go now, he's finding the speed, and up the inside comes Eduardo Chozas. He doesn't get it. Ghirotto holds it quite easily. Chozas is in second place, and now the clock ticks away just a few seconds as Christophe Leven narrowly beaten, but what a nice chase for Christophe. He comes over in third. Don't freewheel too long, Christophe. 16 seconds down. Brian Hope comes over in fourth place ahead of Louvio and Muller. And then the whole field come in, and led in there by De Leon, I think it was, Gilles De Leon. He is a French rider who rides on the Swiss team, and the whole mass charge comes in. Museau finishes it off from the main field, and looking down at this long bunch here, the yellow jersey is safely in, but the green jersey of Olaf Ludwig is not.
This is the result today then here in Switzerland, a win for the Italian rider Massimo Ghirotto, who just managed to outsprint the Spanish rider Eduardo Chozas. They broke away on the Côte des Russes. Taking third place and almost making it first was Christophe Leven of the Castorama rally team. Fourth place for Brian Holm, the champion of Denmark, and he said at the finish if he'd have caught them, he'd have won the stage. But I suppose many people could say that, couldn't they? Out on the road today, the green jersey of Olaf Ludwig was in big trouble. Soon after the start, he lost ground on the field on a very small climb, and he never caught the field up again. He came into the finishing line in a group of around 15 riders, and they were about 15 minutes behind the field. So at the end of the stage today, Olaf Ludwig had to explain to the press what it was like to finish behind the Tour de France, rather than yesterday when he was telling them what it was like to win a stage. Tonight, the overall situation is looking again familiar. Steve Bauer keeping that 17 seconds lead over the Frenchman Ronan Ponsec. Claudio Chiappucci, who says he can now win the Tour de France, rode well today, especially on the Côte des Russes, where he went over the top, not too far behind the leaders and in amongst the prizes. Now we can look at the mountains of the Alps. They're over my shoulder here, and the furthest one away is Mont Blanc. That's where we finish tomorrow, at least halfway up its slopes. We also climb the Col de la Colombière. A real tough day for the followers of the Tour de France. This is what they've all come to see. Steve Bauer tonight says he hopes the weather is cooler because he doesn't like the heat and he doesn't like climbing in it. So he's going to have a tough day, I think, tomorrow. The challengers, who knows where they'll come from in this race now. Raul Alcala is an obvious one. He holds his 5th place overall, just over 7 minutes behind. The Tour de France, for many, will really begin tomorrow. So don't forget to tune in tomorrow night at 6:30 and join us then. But for the moment, from Switzerland, from Paul, myself and Gary, it's goodbye.
You can see the action of Stage 9 again